Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and welcome back to another session of the Doctor's Lab with myself, Dr. Brother Abdul Haq Baker, and our brother Sheikh Dr. Khalid Green. Assalamu alaikum, Brother Khalid.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hayyakallah. It's a pleasure to be back. And the time went quick because it seems like we just ended our show, literally. And it went that quick. SubhanAllah.
Absolutely. And I think today's topic is one that is a reason for serious attention and focus from the perspectives that we're going to be looking at, navigating religious versus societal spaces, especially in view of the myriad changes and challenges that we're seeing that are being thrown at our youth today, and where we as parents feel like we're treading on eggshells in some perspectives, and from another angle, walking through minefields because of legislation that has been enacted that is really geared towards moving our children into an altogether different space to what we were in when we were younger. Well, what do you think, Brother Khalid? I think that with regard to the US context, there will be some differences, but I feel there are very, very similar parallels in a number of areas as it relates to the challenges being thrown via the curriculum as well as societally at our children, impacting us as parents in how we parent our children.
Absolutely. In the US context, because the US is so big, and so, with state semi-autonomy, each state, having kind of some of their own policies, you can see the more liberal, so-called progressive states, how they're even on a stronger path to destruction. In essence, they are flag bearers. They are the ones going first and foremost, driving the disease. I mean, what we're confronted with in our Muslim communities and as a society, Muslim and non-Muslim, is really an onslaught. It's an onslaught. I mean, that's, and you can't help but almost talk about it daily in so many, because you see it manifested in so many different ways, as you said, through the curriculum, through the schools, through your media, through social media. I mean, this is the month. This is June. I don't know if that's worldwide or if that's in the States, but June, they have declared this. I only found this out just recently, that this is it's some sort of month.
Pride month.
It's Pride month. So it's for everybody to be proud. So we see it, and it's, so you can't go into your Google search engine without pride being pumped and celebrate your trans friends. And, you can't watch a horror movie without it being, men as parents, or, a comedy that's shown, this is, it's an onslaught. It's in the media. It's in social media. It is in your face. It is in the school system, and it's being shoved down your throat. It's really it's an understatement. I mean, what Imam bin Baz, he was talking about the war of ideas, and this would have probably been the 80s or 90s. I forgot what was the Harb Fikri or something like this.
Yeah, Ilhab al-Fikri.
Ilhab al-Fikri, so this is like, terrorism, terrorist thought. But I think he's, war, anyway, ala kulli hal, that, it's a war of ideas. And now you really see these war of ideas manifested on the world stage. This is why Kamala, Vice President of the United States, is going to go to Uganda and go to states and dictate, with all the problems that Africa has as a continent, and in various states, the different things of war and famine and other struggles they might have, and people stealing their resources. At the same time, the first thing they're gonna have a conversation is you need to change your policy towards the LGBTQ community. You need to represent the Ugandans that want to wear dresses that have big beards. You need to represent this. This is what we're dealing with.
It is, as I've said, that is a key change, I think, in the generational shifts that we're looking at with regards to parenting today. You've given some apt examples regarding that. And what I think we need to look at today with regards to this navigation through this societal space? We haven't touched upon the religious yet, and we will. We need to touch upon the religious. Is as parents, I think there needs to be a reset about what parenting is and what does Islam provide in the way of guidance regarding parenting, because that's there. That is there. So before we even go into societal challenges outside the home, what are we allowing to seep in to our homes that are affecting our family structure? What are we doing as parents to ensure the nurturing and instruction of our children? Because I think you will agree with me, Khalid, on a number of fronts, we have had to adapt, adjust, and compromise in particular instances, because it's not always the case of having a good and evil and basically shunning the evil to bring the greater good. Sometimes we've got two evils and we've got to look at the lesser evil as a mitigating factor to what is the greater evil. It's not a choice of you can't have either, because we're seeing that the pull from society to our children through social media, through schools, the moment they walk out of the door, within the four walls of our home, we're seeing that this challenge is pervasive. But if we are being complicit in that through our neglect of parenting, according to the parameters that Islam allows us to do that in, then we have some accountability issues that we need to be addressing before anything else.
No, absolutely. Well, you see a lot of this because although on the world scale, the international scale or international stage, that, you know, even Muslim societies are dealing with some of these challenges to a greater lesser extent, a much lesser extent. But as Muslim minorities, and now you can really honestly, without going way beyond the rhetoric, you can see the real need and necessity for hijrah. The argument is even greater. And yeah, everyone's not going to get on the plane and go back, but there's a lot of people who do have options. When we look at the immigrant populations in the Muslim, from Muslim minorities, for example, in the West, I don't know what the UK numbers are, but there's, it's huge. In America, it's probably, I don't know if it's more than 50%, I don't know what the numbers are, but, there's a lot of people who do have some options. And I think that you can see more and more communities beginning to say, hey, this is, something we didn't bargain for, we didn't account for, and this is ridiculous, especially for the children. Now, I'm very close to the Somali community, so I know a lot of Somalis, they'll send their children to Kenya. They'll do this. I'm not saying this is always going to be the best solution, but you've actually, as a parent, and that's for those who are dealing, in this, dealing firsthand, for me, alhamdulillah, some of us are blessed. We have a little homeschooling for the rest of our young ones, which is, I can't imagine it any other way. I can't imagine my children going to school and having to confront what they do today, probably in the last 10 years. So hijrah is something very real. And you can see that in certain states and certain places, it may become a real reality that it becomes not mustahab, not recommended, that it's an obligation, because you can't save your children. Another point that you mentioned is the proactive. I believe parenting, and it's something we've kind of learned through the school of hard knocks. It really is as much as possible. You have to be proactive. You have to be there right on the ground with your young children, teaching them how to navigate, teaching them, being a friend, not just that authority figure. You need to be there, because we're seeing the repercussions now with these newer generations of what's happening. You can't do as we were able to, our parents both could work, and we were the Twilight Zone and Three's Company and stuff were raising us, but it still was nothing like what we see today. We were raised by the television, and we could go out and play, and we didn't really worry, as long as I came back in before dark, or, at dark, so we could kind of go and get lost and do some things. But now I think there is a much greater evil, and there's a much more sinister, systemic plan to corrupt your children. So parents, as you said, parenting is very proactive. It's not like it was in the past. And I really feel for single parent households, because sometimes in even dual parent households, it may not be a reality that you're going to be able to spend much time with your children, but you absolutely have to. You need to know what's on their social media devices. As some of the mashayikh they mentioned, they said, no, they're into your household. I don't care if they're 18, 19, you still need to know what's on their device, because as one of the Yahud was talking about, I listened to this, and I might have mentioned this podcast before on NPR, and anyway, and he was just talking about, he said, what we found in a lot of our religious communities is even religious families, when the door closes at night, their girls are in the room locked away, putting on webcam shows. And, and especially now you've got total platforms designed for that, and monetizing it at that. Right. We live in it's a different reality. Nam.
And Brother Khalid, alhamdulillah, as you've said, it's got to be proactive parenting. And what we're seeing in some quarters is a reactive parenting for the large part. Also, it's really important to understand that we've got to nurture our children, not negotiate. And you see many parents, not just Muslims, negotiating with their children because their children have this added strength now, or these added rights that society says they can have, right down to you want to change your sex, right down to you want to leave the home because you don't want to wear hijab anymore. The circumstance that happened in the UK with a friend of mine, his brother-in-law, many years ago, I think I've mentioned it previously, where the daughter at 13 or 12 or 13 rang the police and said, my parents want me to wear hijab, I don't want to wear it. The police turned up outside the door and took the daughter, put her into care, saying this is her right in this instance. So these are things that are taking place where there's a compulsion for some parents who feel, or maybe have been in a situation where they haven't been proactive as much, or probably they have in some instances, where they're finding they're in a space of negotiation with their children. I'm one who doesn't believe in that. I believe in nurturing. Discussion, yes, let's not get it misunderstood. Discussion, back and forth, but not negotiating in order to take a passive stance with our children in that regard. And that's happening. We haven't said salams. I want to say wa alaikum salam to all our brothers and sisters, non-Muslim guests, welcome, who have joined us on this particular occasion on this very, very serious topic of parenting. So we've talked about some societal challenges, Khalid, and I think that that's going to continue throughout this discussion. I want us to look at some religious aspects now in what we are not doing enough of. But what's important though, what's important as well, Khalid, is the contextualization of the deen has to make sense to us before we instill it upon our children. Many children are leaving Islam or leaving their parents the first opportunity they get because they've been taught the religion in a solely prescriptive manner. There are prescriptive elements we need to look at, but it's solely do's and don'ts, hellfire, 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 punishment, 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 prescriptive manners. And the deen is a lot more comprehensive and very beautiful once it's taught and imparted, not just through verbalization, but involving the children, involving the parents living as best they can by the dictates of a family, as it were. I've got a book that one of the brothers, mashallah, tabarakallah, had it on his shelf, and he said he recommended that I get it. I got it a few weeks ago, mashallah, and it's about American schools, and it's from a brother. He's a convert. You might know him, Michael Abraham, and the title is called "Engaging Students in Public."
He sent me a copy.
Right. So you would know the book, but I just wanted for the viewers to look basically engaging Muslim students in public schools, what educators need to understand. This is not just down to those who are in the schools, but we should look inwardly as well. And the title, I think, is really good. It starts with telling you how to read this book, but the prologue, Needs and Justification in Educational Research. That needs to be done by us from an insider perspective, so that we're putting out academic papers and publications for the wider society to understand about us and our children and the religious requirements, because we see that in other faiths. You've got a plethora of publications in the Christian world. You've got a plethora of publications amongst the Jewish faith, in other religions. So chapter 2, History of Muslims in America, is talking about, we can do that for the UK, is the Islamic belief and connections to students and families. A very, very important chapter that needs to be looked at. You've got technicalities of following Islam, accommodations and collision in the schools, learning in mosques and implications in modern education. Because the Masajid, Khalid, we've spoken about this before, they need to be doing more. There needs to be more of a structure with regards to the academic education as it is Islamized or incorporating Islamic education. Because Islamic education incorporates, it goes that way, it should go the other way. Then you've got the final chapter looking at texts that feature Muslims. Muslim identity is essential, and what we're seeing is we hear very little of that, okay? Some of it's confined to Black History Month, and we've already had discussions concerning that. It needs to have a relevance to our children in a Western context. And what do I mean by that? We have religious examples, the Salaf, Sahaba, Anbiya, from altogether different regions. We never hear about a European or American context. Fair enough. But what are the characteristics that should be predominant in our children's lives as they are growing up? We know about truthfulness, religiosity, cleanliness, but it needs to be taught in a way that can be espoused as a very, very intrinsic element of their character, with us showing that within the home. But again, when I say contextualization, it cannot be separated from their daily lives. So I'm going to put something out there. I remember when before I had children, wives and I had children, we had this ideal. Yeah, our children, when they grow, they're going to be wearing clothes from the age of 4, 5 years old, and they're going to grow. And obviously that changed very quickly, because you realized that's not a reality, okay? And the children don't want to be like that if their colleagues are not like that in that instance as well. But some parents wanted to impress that upon schools, upon their students, and in schools. And it wasn't the schools that would shun it in that instance, it would be the children, because children like to move about with their peers and everything. So this nurturing and understanding and discussion needs to be taking place from a very, very young age. Religious requirements and dictates are the very first stepping stone and platform and foundation for all of our children. All of our children, irrespective, regardless of the levels of our own religiosity. But we cannot be imposing a stringent, prescriptive practice upon them, because it will end up, in some cases, not all, with them moving between two polarizations. An extremism in one instance, where the shidda is such that they don't know how to understand or contextualize. They have an idealized understanding, and the kuffar and this, and the hatred that they have leads them to some of the extremes that you and I have spoken on in previous episodes. Then you have what you've alluded to and discussed earlier on as well. Those who would go and dive into the liberal extreme, where they would eschew everything religious, their name, everything. They begin to hate Islam, mock Islam with non-Muslim individuals, find particular aspects of Islam that they found problematic and amplify those as a justification as to why the religion doesn't suit them in this day and age. And we need to continually reinforce, contextualize, and learn with our children as we are parenting them. That learning is a reminder to ourselves, but it's an education and new information and ideas coming to themselves. That's not happening so much because of what you've said. The social media has become a parent, Khalid.
Yeah.
This generation are being parented by social media. Our children do not consider us authoritative enough. They will get on the Google and say, look what it's saying here, see what you're saying there. But what we're saying here is from the deen. They may find any Joe Smo or whoever you want to call him in the Islamic terminology who's saying you don't need to do that. This is an understanding, a diluted understanding, distorted understanding, misrepresented understanding. And they would grab that because it fits with what they want to do. It satiates an aspect of the desires that they actually have. So we need to be abreast of this. We need to be able to engage with them and research if we're unsure of what they're bringing back to us as a counterculture to what they have been raised with. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think one of the things you mentioned in the beginning also, I would concur that we don't, it isn't going to be a negotiation with the children. There does need to be those lines of authority, and as well, excuse me, as well as the nurturing and the teaching and giving them the wisdom. So I think one of the things many households and many communities lack is, and now they're seeing the urgency of lacking that, is that there's a lack of giving the children the understanding of Islam. Beyond actually, okay, you've memorized the Quran. Okay, a lot of the communities there really emphasize memorizing the Quran, and then some will actually have other Islamic studies too to complement that. But the children, especially now, you're competing in all these spaces that they're just not interested. They're not interested. They're going through a lot of other complex issues that they're being introduced to now in their public schools, especially if they're going, this is what's happening in the madrasa, in the school, the after school program. But here's where I spend my 8 hours, and this and that and the other. And the teacher's telling me as a young boy, I should wear a dress, and, all the things they're being bombarded with. So as you said, I believe there needs to be that authority, but you need to teach your children how to love Islam. That is something at a young age you have to, because it's very difficult with older children to begin when they're already going through their rebellious teen years and so forth. It's very difficult to begin to now introduce that love and passion for Islam, and then you're also competing with everything else as well. So they need to learn that. They need to, and that's why I say it's much more complex than in our time, the things that they're dealing with, and even the solutions. So they do need to be taught the wisdom behind what they're doing and their worship, and how they can use and benefit from their worship in the society. So there's no doubt they need to contextualize Tawheed and all of those things and teach them to love the Salaf. But that has to come from the parents, illustrating that, showing the example. Oh, listen to this. There's a narration, teaching and making it alive for them. It has to be made alive for them. If it isn't, I mean, wallah mustan, we are faced with so much. So one of the things I would say, the brother's book, and hopefully, he just literally recently contacted me again, because he sent me a copy of the book, and he's going to be coming to Seattle. So we'll probably meet up in the next, I think he said in August. So we'll get a chance to meet and maybe do something together or whatever. But one thing I only got through maybe part of chapter 1 or something, but I felt it was too academic. The audience is that. No one, the average Muslim is not gonna. So, and I think it was written for educators and non-Muslim educators and Muslim educators on how to navigate the public school system or deal with Muslim children and things like this. So it's a bit technical and dry, in that sense, but it has its space, but we probably do need works that would be that the average parent can use to actually begin to counter these things. Now, I don't want to be the one just to say, well, no, run and make hijrah. But if we're honest, it's becoming that much more serious. So people will have to make, because I think regardless of whatever approaches we do, you're going to have a significant amount or a certain amount of people you're going to lose. And that's the reality. You're going to lose children, and that could be in any society. You could be in the land of Tawheed in Saudi. We've seen youth that are not from that society, and of course from that society as well, that are turned out. Boys and girls that are turned out. They were raised in Saudi Arabia, coming from American, British, Canadian, whatever background. Parents thought they would be safe, but again, that's why it shows it's proactive. Their children were doing this and doing that, and we know the stories intricately, or intimately. So it's there's going to be a bit of that. There's going to be that loss, but I think nobody wants to have that to be their children to be that example of the loss. So it is a proactive job. And you have to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's a very difficult. We're dealing with this as communities now, schools, counseling. We're trying to figure out different ways.
I think that with what you said, hijrah is an option for some, as you've rightly said. However, the size of the Muslim communities, or the sizes, of the Muslim communities across the West now are such that we're not going to see that in its entirety. So an infrastructure and the systems have to become more cohesive, because they're too disjointed at the moment, depending on the cultural background, the ethnic background, the socio-economic background. These are elements that we're seeing that continue to come to the fore when we're considering particular communities. I did an MBA going back to, to reveal my age, I did my MBA between 1995 and 97. And my dissertation at the end, that was published or released in 1998, was the significance of state funding for Muslim education in Britain. And when I looked at that, it's a rare MBA in education, that was the channel that was there. Alhamdulillah, I'm very grateful that I did it, because I was one of those who was involved in founding Iqra Independent School in South London, in Brixton at the time, with the sisters and brothers who founded it also. And I looked at particular aspects. I did 3 case studies. I did one of Iqra School, our community school. I did one of a college, a girls' school called Faversham College in Bradford. And I did one of Islamia schools, Use of Islam School, where I worked for him in management, in personnel. And they were all at different stages financially and developmentally. And with Islamia being the most advanced. And I've been to meetings with Youth of Islam, with the Department of Education, petitioning for voluntary aided status. Because when we looked at the statistics, we saw hundreds of thousands, actually, of Christian government-funded schools. We saw a few hundred of Jewish schools, Methodist Christian as well. And I think there were some Sikh schools there. There was 0 Muslim state-funded schools in 1997. Wow. 0. Okay. Now, some would say we didn't want the funding, but there weren't that many schools that could run effectively. So Iqra Independent School, as a fledgling, struggling independent school, had those problems financially of sustainability because of our socio-economic status in that particular environment. Many unemployed, unqualified labor, that regard. Feversham was the next one, which had a better financial status, but was a very culturally embedded school, girls' school, and there were challenges. I was going to say there was a stigma. It wasn't a stigma. There were challenges in that environment. Bradford has a large Muslim population, but this was a girls' school. And so were there challenges about female education in that regard from the community? I don't think so to that extent, but there were challenges, albeit the same. Whereas Islamia now was a very strong school in regard to its leader, Use of Islam, formerly Cat Stevens. He was pumping money into the school, and this was a test case for him with regards to getting state funding. And they did. They achieved it in 1998. Now, I looked at the curricular balance with these schools, the threshold of acceptance. So at the time, Iqra, our school, our curriculum was 87% strong Islamic subjects,
Mm.
and the remainder academic, secular. Faversham was more 50-50, if I remember from my research. And Islamia, they fit into the categorization where they could become a state-funded school, which was 12.5% of the curriculum would be Islamic, and the remainder academic. And when I say academic, I mean in math, science, English. But what we decided to do with Ikram, we attempted to do it. And the directors, the sisters who were directing the school, did a really good job on this, is that we said we want to Islamize the curriculum. What do we mean by that? When we're speaking about maths, when we're speaking about geography and biology, referencing elements of the Quran and making that a pivotal foundational aspect. So it basically focuses the student that all of this is intrinsic to the deen in that particular instance. That research now would say is dated. It can be built upon. But we put that out there, and when I went and met with local education authorities, the CEO there, when we went and had meetings with the Department of Education and the brothers who came on board with me to school, they presented my MBA. When I went in and worked for the Department of Education years later, 2002, I met one of the senior she was under one of the MPs. And she said, your MBA is fascinating. We're looking at it. How do you feel this would fit into the wider picture? And I said, it's a necessary discussion. Because if some of the schools from lower socioeconomic backgrounds need school funding, there cannot be a compromise to the point where we don't recognize the religion anymore. And we saw that I prepared a spectrum of schools. So you had the Dar Ulum that were attached to the Masajid, okay? Then you had the Islamic schools that were independent and focusing solely on Islamiyat as a priority. Then in the middle, you had schools, Muslim schools, 50-50, schools for Muslims, 12.5% Islamic curriculum. Then we had non-Muslim schools with Muslims attending them. And I want to talk about this one now because that's the one that's prevalent. And we'll go back to Jordan's question very shortly. But basically what we said then, as regards, you call them public schools, I had an argument and tried to take that forward with colleagues, and some are doing it, alhamdulillah, not based on what I've said, but they've realized that's a reality, that in the schools where the majority are non-Muslims and they're public schools, state schools, parents should form or join parent committees, okay, to join parent committees so that they can not just influence, but contribute to the development of the curriculum, what comes in, to have their voices there, and at the very least to be a hujjah. Now, many Brits will remember the Trojan Horse affair and how Muslims were demonized in Birmingham, okay, and how the government really threw their weight in behind a slanderous, defamatory attempt to say that those who were involved in this were extremists. And it wasn't. It was parents who pushed back against the RSE classes, religious sex education and the religious studies. They pushed back, and we want the right, we reserve the right to remove our children from school if you're teaching, or from those lessons, sorry, if you're teaching those subjects, okay? They were a strong caucus. Many came from outside the school, which caused problems from a media perspective, but those who are within those committees should have the impact to positively influence and shape what is taking place there. And I want to, Carly, before I hand it back to you, I want to answer some of the questions. MDA, Muslim Disability Awareness, a very strong organization which I'm ambassador for, mashallah, tabarakallah, really doing some good work for those with needs and hidden disabilities and everything. And one, again, the challenges that they face with regards to parenting and being understood and their voices being present and the visibility that's required for them. What I say here now, before I read what has come from them, is that it shouldn't just be them who are petitioning for themselves. We as Muslims need to be lending weight to those with disabilities, hidden and visible, and saying, no, we are walking firmly with them, or even more firmly than them, to represent them in this regard. But I want to read here what they've said. They're considering leaving the UK in particular because Ireland is not as bad. They look at the facts around the unsafety around social services, the possibility of how schools may cause trouble for us. And I won't repeat what I've just said. Therein is why we need to be supporting our brothers and sisters with these challenges, with these abilities. And I'm not saying challenges that their abilities are challenged, because some of those abilities are talents. So we just got to realize that, and we've got to change the paradigm in that regard there. We can't go with the societal paradigm that this is problematic, when in fact it might be a talent and a quality that is a strength in that instance, inshallah. Hassan, can you put back up what Jordan mentioned? And yes, should parents make hijrah to save their children from difficulties in the West? Now, Jordan, we've answered that. I've just come back from a 20-year sojourn abroad. I would say to you that I was in Saudi for 18 years, UAE for 2 years, loved it. My children's sense of Tawheed and their worship and their stability with prayer is there. But there were other things that I saw a dilution of aspects of their practice with regards to the influences that weren't coming from outside. It was coming from the prevalence of the culture there being influenced from the West. So as Khalid has mentioned, it doesn't matter where your children are going to be. Saudi, we saw Saudis being influenced. Look at what's taking place in Saudi with regards to the social scene now. Look at what's taking place with them embracing everything of Western culture. The biggest raves in the world are in Riyadh, for example. The things that are taking place there. So should they make hijrah? I'm not saying no, they shouldn't. Some have taken their children from a very young age, like I did. Okay. It's down to Allah's qadar. It's down to our efforts. Would I say to make hijrah if you're able to go to a Muslim country? Absolutely. Living in a Muslim environment where you're hearing the adhan, where you're seeing the majority attending the masjid, where you're seeing a moral value that is diminishing rapidly in the societies that we're living in the West. Our children will be influenced by that, and they will retain that unless they've gone completely other way. And as Khalid said, it's only a minority that has happened to. Even those who have diluted aspects of their practice, they have still got their moral values. They're still praying. They still have that love for Islam. It's just a weakness on their part in areas where they're not practicing particular etiquettes or observance of hijab or beard or whatever. But yes, if you said here or there, I would say there. And I'm talking primarily from my experiences living there for 20 years. However, what I see of the visibility of the Muslims since returning, what I see of the visibility of the hijab and the practicing is something that I think is impressive. But we need to capitalize on that and have, Khalid's always spoke about institutions, having institutions, academic and otherwise, where we can preserve this, where we can grow it. And those of our generation have to look at the younger generation and put our efforts into, if you want to say legacy building, so be it, but assisting the next generation so we don't lose the generations after. Khalid, what would you say to this?
That was a lot to unpack, but yeah, absolutely. That we, as I mentioned before, that the hijrah to a Muslim land in general is going to be a better option. You know, it gives your children a different type of safety, but also not going with your, what can I say, without being cognizant of the reality that you're not finding paradise on earth. You'll find other challenges there, but the deen taking precedence. So sometimes the people who make hijrah and they want to stay, they sacrifice certain other elements, obviously, and that's what it is. The hijrah is sacrifice. So there's also other challenges of course, now with trying to remain in a country, with the visa system and depending on the lifestyle that you're trying to maintain and a lot of a plethora of issues to really think about. But So that's what I in general would advocate, is being prepared when you want to try to make hijra. Do your homework, do your research, understand the implication, and talk to people who have been on that journey or who are on that journey, and especially people who have long-term experience, as the doctor mentioned. Versus someone who's, yeah, I've been in Saudi Arabia 2 to 3 years, and I'm gonna be here forever, and they have a different perspective, and I say literally they're green in that sense, that they need some real experience and go through the adversity that many of us who had quite a bit of time in many different Muslim lands experience. So that is something that will become more and more, I don't know if I should say relevant, but it will be a greater conversation on the table, because, as I said, America, with its you know federal, being a federal government, having a federal government and the state governments, so each state, they have their own, there's many laws and many restrictions that may be in one state and not in another. And as we see these so-called progressive liberal states, you see them decaying immensely. And I'll give you an example. For example, in crime and homelessness, and all kind of other issues. For example, what amazes me is that many of the big stores, have a policy that if someone is working there, you should not, and you see people stealing, that you just kind of watch them. You watch them and they take out, people are going to load up their vehicles. There was a lady just recently, she loaded up, she went to steal. She was gone for an hour. She left her children in the car, 2 young children. The car caught on fire, but thankfully, some other people saw the children in there. They broke into the lady's car. They were able to get the children out more or less safely. They got a little burn. So now the lady is under arrest, not for stealing. She was gone for an hour to steal in the mall, hitting different stores. But her biggest issue is her former crime spree, and her and the fact of neglect of her children. So now her children have taken from her. So my point is you see a social decay on different levels in different states, and with America being so big, and you just see where there's just, there'll be a greater sense of urgency for some people to make hijra, to get out. Only so many people are going to realistically think about even making hijra. So the numbers will always probably be generally pretty small, unless things change to such a drastic, there's so much Islamophobia that it becomes a lot of violence against Muslims. I mean, on a wide scale, where you just can't walk down the street anymore and things like this. Maybe this will change some people's minds more and influence them even more so. But yeah, that's something, it's, we're dealing with a lot of things right now. We're dealing with a very complex set of issues. And with the onslaught of secularism and progressivism and these so-called progressive ideas, because it's no longer anything that you could be passive about. They're making you make a choice. I see in Muslim organizations that sisters have to put on their email, sister so and so, program manager, she, her. I was like, what is that? You have to identify your pronoun to distinguish yourself as someone who was born a female, because these people are now dictating the whole narrative. It's really an onslaught. It's really a war. It's a war of ideas, a war of civilizations, a war of morality, an onslaught of immorality, and that's the norm. So, it's going to be very hard to defend your children, to teach your children. I know people personally who are dealing with that now. They've got teenagers that are, dealing with issues that may not be out in the public, but maybe they are dealing with those kind of sexuality issues, as well as a lack of total regard and respect for their parents, like shamelessly. And there's a lot of reasons behind that, of what built up to that stage. And that's kind of where the end result. That's why you have to be proactive. You have to teach your children morality at the young age, and you need to be friends with them. It's just really hard. It is, man, subhanallah, I don't know what to say, with people with children now, and having young children, and especially in the public school, and not only that, just the environment. You go to the books, not just the bookstores, the library, there's going to be my two mommies, my two daddies, I'm sure now a lot of the public libraries, there's probably whole shelves now celebrating this month. For the next month, it'll be Pride Month. You're going to have massive collections and selections. And I'm still in culture shock, having left Saudi Arabia only now 3 years now, I think, coming up on 3 years. And, just even coming to where I'm at now, I just recently left Washington, where I'm from. And, at the airport and everything, the guy working there, he, what we say is suspect, okay, and it was just, and then this person here, and I don't want to slander anybody, but man, I don't know what to make of this individual with all this makeup and long hair. I don't know if it was a man or a woman, or whatever they want to classify themselves as. It was in your face. Even as I came into the town back to Seattle, it was just out of control. It was just like everywhere. The female couple, this and everybody, and then they're outwardly showing their affection, if you know what I mean, and just like, it's not anything light anymore. It's a war. It's like a force. You will be ostracized. You will be condemned. And there was a program, and I think this was a sister in the UK in one of the Muslim schools, and she was just brokenhearted. She says what she deals with in the Muslim school, that when something about homosexuality and transgender and all these movements came up, that all the children were super pro that. They had been bombarded, and there's so much like, what's wrong? Why are you speaking ill about this? This is, this is prejudice, and, subhanAllah. So it show, the mind, once the mind is gone, the mind and the heart, it's finished. It's finished.
Right. Yes. No. I agree. I agree. Acknowledge everything.
I just thought about one other thing. Sorry. When you said two things, one thing about the organization you mentioned about the Muslim disability something, that, we need people like yourself as that ambassador, as the, to give us knowledge about that. So the only way as a community we can deal with that is there does need to be a voice. It needs to be out there. You need to, come to the masjid and speak on this, give some time, because most of us are unaware. If we don't have those issues, and we don't have those issues in our homes, we're not thinking about it. Until you just mentioned that, I hardly gave that any thought. Okay. And those challenges. So we need education about that. And the second thing is the issue with the government funding. This is another issue too, where a lot of our communities, they're dealing with funding issues, whether it be funding their huge masajid that have youth programs, and whether they take this money from the government or other sources that are so progressive and so liberal that have a lot of wealth, that have to compromise so much of their Islam that you wonder what's left. And I think probably an example that might be relevant to this would be something like Yaqeen, which is a multi-million-dollar organization. These types of organizations, they're well-funded, not because of their Tamasuk bi Sunnah, because they're adhering to the Quran and the Sunnah and they can speak. No, because they can engage with these ideas. They can show both sides of the coin. They can water down so much of the deen to where it's like, what are you really saying? Are you pro? Are you taking a Muslim stance? What are you talking about? So this is the danger that we deal with, and it's an issue with the funding. We have to also begin, as we talked about before, to fund our institutions. People have to, if you want to, teach your kids Islam, you need to start funding, those people who studied, and you need to build those things from the grassroots. And we need the wisdom of the community, meaning those students of knowledge, they come back combined with elders that have the on the ground experience, who know these communities, and you put that gem together, and you have something where you can really benefit. You form those coalitions based on meeting the needs of the community. So, we have a lot of work to do.
We do. And I think Octavia mentioned the point where we're seeing that men and women, are straight men, straight women are being classified, and we're the majority, classified as cis. I'm a cis male, cis, well, not us, and he's a cis male, she's a cis woman, cisgender. This is a problem where we've got a
What is
minority.
I heard about that recently, but what does it stand for?
Do you know what? I'll ask Octavia or someone else to write up there because I'm not even looking into that. I don't know. But
Oh, me
certain things I have ignorance of. And as they said, ignorance is bliss in some instances. But what I would say is that looking at a minority ideology that has become prevalent amongst the majority is alarming. Whatever that minority ideology may be, that is a corrupting influence on society, but specifically children. Now, note, hear what I've said carefully. I'm not just speaking about one ideology here. I'm talking about any minority ideology that is corrupting the morality of a society. We can go back 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and there were such ideologies, okay, before we face what we're facing now. And the majority, due to traditional values, social values, that may have been existing for centuries, have now reached a stage where we're ostracized to hold those traditional values. We know in the Christian church where there have been pushback from some of the more orthodox, saying that marriage is the institution between a male and a female. And we're looking now as parents at an obscuring and obfuscation of what these two genders, only two genders, I'm going to get in trouble for this, are. And I'm speaking from my perspective, and I'm speaking from a biological perspective, and I'm speaking from a scientific perspective, I'm speaking from an evidential perspective. The reason I'm saying all of this, Carly, because despite all of this evidence, as you and I have as academics, Muslim academics, we can still be shut down and cancelled, which I'm not bothered about. Despite the evidence, we'll use that word again, plethora of evidence that has existed since the beginning of time. But I want to move now from that ideological perspective. The UK government did something very interesting in the publishing or the compilation of a report. I referred to it in the a few weeks ago with Brother Abdurrahim Green in A Piece of Cake, but we didn't go into it in too much detail. But it's something that I feel we need to be aware of, and from a UK perspective, use that as a navigating tool instead of it being used against us as a navigating tool. And it's called the Bloom Review. Someone called Colin Bloom, who's an independent faith engagement advisor. And the title of this report, it's a 94-page report, I believe. Does Government Do God? An independent review into how government engages with faith. Sorry, a 159-page report. And I said in that the piece of cake that while there are negative aspects to it, and it's written from a particular perspective, predominantly through a Christian lens, the fact that it acknowledges the importance and significance of faith to people's lives is something we should take advantage of when navigating religiously through these societal spaces, not only for ourselves as a Muslim ummah community, but particularly for our children. We should, in inverted commas, weaponize this report to our advantage. It doesn't only talk about Muslims, it talks about Muslims a lot, and it brings in the extremist lens and everything like that. Unsurprisingly, we should expect that. It speaks about other faiths, it speaks about Sikh extremism, and its language is quite loaded because when it talks about Hinduism, it talks about nationalism. When it talks about black extremism, it talks about black nationalism. So it chooses when to use the term extremism or nationalism. Irregardless of that, irrespective of that, it's a report. It talks about faith in education, religious education, faith literacy among educators, faith schools, faith-based out-of-school settings, faith-sensitive student finance, because now they're now doing a halal financing for Muslim students, and then the recommendations there. That's just chapter. If anyone is looking for that report and they're looking at following up from this discussion, chapter 3, faith in education. It talks about other areas, religion, belief in the UK, faith in prisons and the like. But the Bloom Review is something they've put out there as an acknowledgement. It's the first time ever that a report, a review of this nature has been conducted independently on behalf of government. And I feel that while it is loaded and there are things that we have to watch out for there, looking at what we are discussing now, to use this to our advantage. And you need educators, you need religious leaders, we need parents to be looking at it carefully and say, okay, I'm going to cite this report with regards to the rights of my child not to be learning XYZ, and that they should be learning ABC with regards to religion. I've used the alphabet, forgive me, I didn't want to box it on that. I'll use it in numbers next time. But it's really important that we use what they've put out there and weaponize it, small w, inverted commas, to our benefit. And I'm sure other religious groups are going to be doing likewise with this tool from the government, because then it makes it more difficult for them to counter or push back when it's their own report. We're pushing forward, say this is how we're navigating this space regarding our children as parents.
Mashallah, tabarakallah. Yeah, I have nothing to comment there, but I'm interested in the report myself anyway, just to have a look at it.
I'll send that across to you. I think as we're drawing up to the hour, Khalid, I think it's an important conversation. I know that many will have a view on this. The societal spaces that are there for us in the West now are constricting us. They're almost suffocating us from a religious perspective.
Yeah.
I've mentioned that report there because that report could be sort of that wedge to stop the encroachment to some degree of that suffocation, but it won't remove it completely. And parents have to consider, if they're not engaging proactively, as you've said earlier on, we stand to have a very diluted subsequent generation. And I want to bring an example of where that happened in Europe. And I bring everyone's attention and memory back to Bosnia, to the Balkans, to Albania. What happened when the Balkans conflict broke out? We know some of us were involved intrinsically in what happened there. And when speaking with some Bosnians, they said, we were married to our Serb, Croat neighbors. We used to eat with them. We used to be in their homes. They used to be in our homes. And then when the war broke out and they started breaking down our doors, killing, butchering, raping us, they had a historic resentment that lay dormant from the defeat of their nations at the hands of the Ottoman 100 or more years ago, a century or so before. And the propaganda that led them to release this hatred was on the nationalism that was actually there. And we saw barbarism on the footsteps of Europe, on the doors of Europe, in Europe, should I say, more precisely, that we'd never witnessed before. And the Bosnians have said, we have lost and forgotten about our faith. It took this conflict for many of them to return to the religion. Yes, Brother Bilal, we spoke about Michael Abraham's work earlier on, and Brother Khalid said he sent him a book and that he will be seeing him when he visits him in Seattle very shortly, mashallah, tabarakallah. Wow. So coming back to that, Khalid, that is a risk that we have, that through what is taking place now, the onslaught that you've referred to so accurately will result in the next generations possibly accepting assimilation into these societies. And you know, assimilation means the eschewal, the removal of identities in all but name, and even that may go in the end. Whereas integration, which some still argue about, is a less drastic step because you are retaining elements of your faith, your ideology, your culture, and you're contributing that which is conducive to the society that you are living in. And I'll stop at this point reading Brother Musa's point. Do you believe that historic resentment exists dormant elsewhere in Europe? E.g., do you reckon that something that deep could exist in Western Europe? Absolutely, Musa. And we're seeing that with the rise in populism, and we're seeing populist parties, far-right parties, assuming power at a scale that we've never witnessed before across Europe. And that is actually there. And what we're seeing with that historic resentment is something very interesting, Brother Musa, in that we're seeing other ethnicities join in with that far-right rhetoric. We're seeing Sikh extremists, Hindu extremists, join in with white nationalists, far-right extremists, in their resentment of the Muslim other. Mm. I'm seeing that in the UK myself, and it's been there for a number of years, and it's been on the increase. And you'll see black advocates for this far-right extremism. You'll see South Asian Sikhs, Hindus with this far-right extremism, all pointing towards, all facing inward or outward, if you like, towards the Muslim population. So we have some serious challenges if we today, parents today, do not really step up the navigation religiously, contextualize, not with an extremism, not with an abstract idealistic extremism. We can tell the stories of old. We should tell the stories of old, but we should bring a context to today, and we should try to emulate that context in ourselves to show that Islam is transferable across every era of every society, at every time, in every place. That Tawheed is something that breathes through this ummah, that the Sunnah is something that can be practiced, albeit some of the some Sunnah more than other Sunnahs, depending on the societal climes that we're living in. If we don't do that, what we saw in mainland Europe in the early to mid 90s could become a reality for successive generations down the line if they have no longer any basis or foundation or knowledge of what it means to be an active, observant Muslim within a Western context today. Khalid, I hand it to you before we conclude, inshallah.
I again have nothing to really add. As you said, that, you know, keeping that Muslim, that Islamic identity, and those are the challenges that we face and our youth face. And we see this rise, you know, even in that same, I guess, that Bosnia and Serbia and Kosovo, the tensions are reactivated, and maybe they never really dissipated. They never really were gone in the first place. So it's being revived in those movements. And as you said, the populism, we have it here in the States as well. But, you know, we just have some other complexities involved as well. But yeah, you know, again, you know, holding on to that Islamic identity, but how we do that is where we really is the challenge ahead of us. You know, how do we inculcate that in our children? How do we protect them in these schools, or even outside the schools, just in the society in general, just maintaining your Islam? You know, we're all having this conversation.
I think Musa's questions have been very pertinent at this point, and he's saying the adage, the socio-political dynamics within the Salafi community is what practical steps should Muslims be taking, which they are currently not taking, to adequately resist this rising current of hatred. Particular reference to the Salafi community is appreciated. And Musa, the very, very good question. Before I forget, there was something from another brother who said about me returning to Brixton in the golden era. I don't think that that's a possibility at this time. I just remembered that now, mashallah. But I'm back. I'm back to support and advise if that's acceptable to those who would accept such advice. But coming back to Musa's question, from the Salafi perspective, Musa, one of the things that I witnessed, was a part of, Khalid was as well, in the 90s, early noughties, is that the drive and focus upon authenticity and authentic referencing with regards to the Sunnah, in order to revisit and thereafter retain a purity in how we understand Tawheed, is something that is not as prevalent today. Where there was a shortcoming, and I stopped at that point, is that we didn't at that time fully move towards actualization of Tawheed, how to actualize Tawheed, because I think many of us were very young at that particular time, and actualizing Tawheed meaning how to implement elements of Tawheed. And I think Sheikh Tahir, Brother Tahir Wyatt's talks on Allah's Asma, wa Sifat, names and attributes, is a tremendous series. If you want to know how to actualize Tawheed, and you go through some of those lectures that Sheikh Tahir delivered, you'll then understand the point that I'm making. We were teaching it, we were focusing upon it, and we were trying our level best. But at that stage, many of us were at that very idealistic, activist stage. In that instance, many went away to study, like Brother Khalid and Dr. Khalid, and came back so they could show an actualization, a pragmatism to this Tawheed. And the Sunnah in itself as well. We focused and still have focus upon implementing the Sunnah. Because without the Sunnah, you are just like a car driving crazily down a motorway, bashing every which way and not knowing if you're going to hit your destination. We have the Salaf, and taking from the Salaf and contextualizing what the Salaf did in today's era, today's society, that we have in our hands. Now, Brother Khalid and I have talked about this before, and I'm going to say this, and I'm saying it deliberately. Those who hear Salafi and talking Salaf, don't look at our behavior, okay? Look at the practice of the Salaf as we are doing, and attempt and endeavor to emulate that in your lives. Because there's no point in you trying to preach that outside and it's not within your home, and it's not within yourself, and the example's not there. Okay? It's really important to look at that. And as the Salafi communities today have become so distracted by the internecine fighting that they won't look here or there or whatever, and there are few who are speaking with an autonomy, like Dr. Khalid, Sheikh Tahir, Abdul Wahid Stevenson, a number of individuals I can mention from the UK and from America, who are unafraid of being a part of a party, an organization, an entity. So if we are going to actualize or be pragmatic with regards to our parenting, we really have to be honest and look at where are we taking our knowledge? What is the source? What is the authenticity of what we are taking? If some say, oh, you were talking about the Saudis, the scholars of Saudi, the scholars of here, the scholars everywhere, go to those who have spoken and take their context, because sometimes it's admittedly a context dealing with their region, but not always. And we have students now among us who have learned from them, who know the context of our societies, and we take from them, as you would go to a doctor for a particular prescription of medicine, then you look to those who have answers or skills and knowledge in that particular field that you're looking at, and you obtain that knowledge for guidance in your own lives, your own communities. And my final point would be on a community basis. And I'm not just talking about Salafi communities now. And I'm not just talking about where the ideology comes down to it. The Muslims in the West need to become more united in the practical onslaught that is there against us. When I asked Sheikh Wasi Allah, I've brought it before, the ayah about وَتَّصِمُوا بِحَبْلِ اللَّهِ جَمِيعًا وَلَا تَفَرَّقُوا, that one, and also تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْبِرِّ وَالتَّقْوَى وَلَا تَعَاوَنُوا عَلَى الْإِثْمِ وَالْعُدْوَانِ. The last one particularly, join together in bir and righteousness, goodness and taqwa, righteousness, but do not come together in sin and transgression. And I asked him, is that a societal injunction? So for example, if we are fighting an extremism of sorts, and there are other entities of Muslims that don't share the same Aqidah as us, there are non-Muslims who don't share any of what we share, but this evil or this challenge that is affecting society on the whole, brings these groups together in a similar space to say, no, no, no. Should we work with them just in that sphere, limited to that sphere? And he said to me, then what else is that ayat referring to, if not that? Ideally, yeah, all the same ideology, same akida, same faith in a Muslim society, yes, but we are in the West. So we need to revisit that. We need to revisit the understanding. Let me put a disclaimer again, because some will shoot down and, oh, we say we should work with everyone. The Ikhwani say we should work with everyone and such and such and such. That is not what I'm saying. That is not what I'm saying. But no one would disagree that the challenge that we have today facing our children is one unprecedented, and there are many who are pushing back against it, the majority. But the reason why that is growing, those ideologies, that moral decay continues to escalate, is because everyone's working in silos. And it's very easy for a government to pick off these silos and keep them divided and keep their voices separate. It's a discussion to be had. I'm not a scholar. It's a discussion to be had on how to navigate what I've just said there effectively without compromising our tawheed, without compromising our ideology, without diluting our message, as we've seen has happened to the Black community when everyone else has joined them and said, we are with you. So Musa's saying, he's saying, forgive me for being so blunt, but I'm asking generally rather than firing a loaded question. What is the process of transforming academic study of Tawheed into the aforementioned resistance? That's a very good question. And I'm not sure that we have the time to answer. You're saying, or did you misunderstand my answer? I don't know, Musa, did you? Did you misunderstand my answer? I'm talking about actualizing Tawheed. I'm talking about when we're speaking about Allah is Al-Rahman, when we're talking about Allah is Al-Aziz, when we're talking about Allah is Al-Wadud, how do we implement that in our daily lives? When we say that Allah is all-seeing, look at our behavior, look at what's taking place in the communities. Let's talk about what's taking place individually. If Allah is all-seeing, why are we steeped in the sin that we're steeped in? Where is the practical application of that particular attribute of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? This is what I'm talking about. Tawheed has been taught, particularly amongst the Salafi community, for the last 30 plus years. And it's been successful on the whole. But a lot of it has been academic, religious, not transferred into a practical reality in some instances. This is what I mean. I hope that's clear, Brother Musa.
Yeah, I'd like to add. Yeah, oh, I don't know if your thing went out or did. Can you hear me? You hear me okay? Okay. Yeah. So you articulated things very well, and I think especially about dealing with the majal, the specific area where there can be ta'awun, when there's that greater threat for the society. But the person who just had, before we get into this, yes, can there be a unity between Asharis, Maturidis, the Maturidis, and the Salafis in the West to push back on the liberal narrative? So again, as the doctor mentioned, and he gave his experience with dealing with Sheikh Wasi Allah Abbas, Hafidhullah Ta'ala, and that when there is a greater harm for the society, there will be those things. For example, dealing with the public schools. Well, the Asharis, the Salafis, all of us have to deal with those same issues in the society. And we're all Muslim. And generally, I think we're probably generally not making takfir of each other. There's going to be those examples. Yes, there's going to be people making takfir of one another. But the bottom line is there are some common issues. If we have to resolve the parking of the masjid, and there's different people in that masjid, because for example, in America, anyway, many of the places, there isn't that division. It may be kind of an Ashari or Maturidi masjid, but there's going to be Salafis in there as well, because they're so few in numbers. So you will have to work together for a common good in those things, especially those things which are really, although they have a dini implication, but they're dunyawi as well. You know, hey, we need a traffic light so the old men can cross the street safely. Let's go to the city and, you're educated and you can articulate this and you can write the proposal so we can get a stoplight or, something to cross to cross the crosswalk. Or there's going to be areas where there's going to be a need for cooperation in the greater society, because we all live together as Muslim minorities. We are all grouped together under that and dealing with some common issues that you won't be able to deal with on a micro level and so forth. So, and this is not sounding not to contradict that, but also anyway, a lot of our changes too, as far as dealing with the onslaught of the society. There was another thing someone else had posted, I think Musa had posted on there, but that a lot of these things, as far as dealing with the hatred and Islamophobia and stuff, they will have to be dealt with on a micro level as well as a macro level, as far as a community. A lot of it comes through education. I'll give you an example. My job that I'm, my current place of employment, it's actually a fairly conservative area where I work in. They're big Trump supporters. My old colleague was a major Trump supporter. And it was interesting. A guy who's a preacher who also, but he deals with me. We deal with each other respectfully on the job. And he said, how are you and your colleague, or how are you and your colleague who's no longer with us? How are you guys? I said, we were cool. We used to navigate things and subjects. I actually benefited from some of his way of thinking and his conservative values. And we had some commonalities there. Of course, I'm not into the politics like him. He's a massive Trump supporter and a massive, and he has his racist overtones too, plain and simple. But he said, I was just wondering, because he used to really speak before you came. He used to speak really bad about Muslims and how they were the worst in invading America. I said, wow, that's interesting. Now he has a different perspective. So now we even actually, now that we're no longer employed together, we still have occasionally I'll drop him a line, tell him what's going on, or he, things like this. We'll keep up with one another. And that is on the micro level. Now he knows, he understands. At first I could see there was some resistance. Hey, I'm a Muslim, this is the Jumu'ah prayer, so I'm going to go, I have to go and do Jumu'ah, and I'm going to step out of the office. I need to pray, but he got accustomed to that. He saw the religiosity. He saw the commonalities there, because he is super anti this progressive liberal ideology. And I say this to say that even on the micro level, you can sometimes, it's through education and people encountering people that sometimes that's going to change your perspective and give you an introduction to something a bit new, to where you don't just carry things by blind prejudice and so forth. So I think as a community, as a larger on the communal scale, masajid, that we'll have to do something without compromising our religion and religious tenets and principles and methodology, be able to educate the broader community. There's nothing wrong with, a dawah thing that you open up, and your feet, if they see the Muslims, for example, in any big city in America, if you see the Muslims are out there on a Saturday, cleaning up the streets, going to the homeless, providing drinks and food, as some of the brothers do in Seattle, actually, and you see this, people are going to be they're going to have a different understanding of Islam. Either there'll be the implication of some people will embrace Islam. Some people will at least remove some of their stigmas about Islam. Say, hey, you guys are actually, you do support people. Oh, you actually, care about others. It's not just Muslims or, whatever the case may be. This is a type of dawah. This is a type of dawah ilallah. This changes, helps to change or introduce change to people's mentality. So I think that is also, that goes in line, just taking it a step further, what the doctor was saying about implementing Tawheed. Because if you're implementing the principles of Islam, you're implementing Tawheed. And I think getting beyond that textbook, we have many people who are doing the worst of sins, and they know the categories of Tawheed like this. They can rattle it off, and they can even give you evidence, and then give you the evidence in Arabic. But that doesn't mean they're implementing Tawheed. That doesn't mean it has changed their, having some change in their behavior, that their iman has increased, that they're actually doing things for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's Tawheed. Being sincere, be sincerely, we have a food program. Okay, we want to implement. Hey, I just wanted to let you guys know, as Muslims, we do it like this. Here's a gift. Oh, our Ramadan is fasting. Here's a gift from our household because we're Muslims. We just finished this holy month of Ramadan. Blah 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 blah. Give them a little education. It's not going to take him out of the church, come to the masjid, but he's going to have a different understanding about Islam, which is different than what he was getting on Fox News or wherever, that he's being bombarded with. So I think this is where we have that impact and so forth. And as far as pushing back the liberal narrative, there's these I think ultimately it's going to be through Islamic knowledge, solid Islamic knowledge. And I think the Salafis are truly in the best of positions to be able to push back not only the extremist Takfiri ideology, but also the extremist progressive ideology. And we've talked about that before. Maybe we need to revisit that topic from a different angle, because there's no doubt this onslaught by adhering to, and this is where a commonality with some of the Asharis and Maturidis, because they're generally pretty conservative communities generally. Now, Ashari, it's an Aqidah, so there's going to be Asharis that are kind of, there are people who are progressive who have a sort of Ashari Aqidah, but when we talk about like the Deobandis and stuff like this, they're very conservative, they're very religious, their women wear hijab better than a lot of other women. The men have big beards and they're, short thobes, and they have that outward appearance, but they believe in those important some important sunnahs, but our differences are going to be in important aspects of dawah methodology and aqidah. But they are also have a disdain for that liberal progressive onslaught which attacks our community. That's a commonality. But I believe the Salafis are in the best position to deal with those ideologies through knowledge, through insight, through wisdom, and all of those tenets, fiqh fi din. Whenever Allah wants good for a person, he gives them fiqh of the understanding, as the Prophet ﷺ said. And this is going to give us the strength, the hujjah wa bayan, so we can stand with a strong stick or a sword and deal with those ideologies that, hey, and I'm not espousing violence, I'm saying we're dealing with it with the knowledge. We're cutting off the doubts with knowledge and with wisdom and with insight, dealing with this and calling people back to morality, which is all there in the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
Khalid, jazakallah khair. I think on that note, yes, Musa, jazakallah khair, Doctor, as a young Salafi, your streams are like a safe space for me to ask these questions, which unfortunately I'm not quite addressed in your average Salafi dars. So barakallah feekum. Wayak, Brother Musa, I hope that Dr. Khalid and my response has been sufficient, has sufficed, inshallah, and we're happy to talk about anything in that regard. We're unafraid, if you like, in that instance, mashallah. We will conclude at this point until another fortnight. I hope that even as we've gone off tangentially to some of the points we've touched upon, it's all returned to or re-emphasized the importance of this subject that we're speaking about. We really have to look at our parenting and how we're going to continue to navigate as things appear to be getting more difficult, as they appear to be becoming more constricted, as I've mentioned, especially as it relates to our faith as Muslims. But where there are tools that are thrown out there by the government, the Bloom Report and things I've mentioned there, can we take aspects and utilize them to navigate these constricting, closing spaces? Again, until 2 weeks' time, inshallah, another 2 weeks, we'll be back with you with another subject, engaging subject. So from me, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Brother Khalid.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Jazakallah khairan. Allah yubarak feekum.